Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining today for the last session of this great conference. I'm in California, so unfortunately I haven't seen the other sessions today, but I'm sure there was some good stuff, and I'm sure there was a ton of stuff about generative AI, the topic du jour. So what I wanted to take you through is GPT. Is it your friend or your foe? And when I say GPT, I'm talking, it's the OpenAI term, but it's really about all generative AI. But one thing that I've come to realize is if you raise yourself to the power of GPT, good magic happens. It's kind of like E equals MC squared. This is the formula in the generative day and age where you can make yourself better. So I'm Frederick Vallaeys. I've been doing PPC for over 2 decades. Started in my college dorm room at Stanford, running some PPC ads on goto.com. Then I joined Google in 2002. I helped them translate AdWords into Dutch. I'm originally from Belgium. Did that for a bunch of years. I was a AdWords evangelist. And then I started my own PPC management SaaS company, Optmyzr. So we help a lot of advertisers just be more efficient when they manage their ads. And you can follow me on all the social media. I've written a number of books, so please check those out on Amazon. And I was also very honored this year to be named the top influencer or top influential PPC expert for 2024. So I hope to live up to that title. So today, the agenda, what I wanted to go over, there's a lot of stuff here, but basically, I think AI can be your friend. And so I wanted to cover some of the tools and techniques that I personally use to help make me better. So how do I produce content faster? How do we write more relevant ads with it? How do we write some scripts? How do you learn new things, et cetera, et cetera. Here's an example of one tool that I really like. It's called Ideogram AI that has generated the image. One little frustration that you often have with image generation in Gen AI is that it's very bad at putting text on images. But this tool, you can specifically say, this is the text that needs to go in this place, and it usually writes it right. So AI is here, tips and tricks from Fred Vallaeys. That's fully AI generated with a tool called Ideogram. I'll be sharing a lot of tools throughout today's presentation. But again, I'm in Silicon Valley. I'm located in Los Altos, which is the city where Steve Jobs grew up. Has a lot of history down here. My office is literally right across the street where some of the silicon wafers were invented. So what we see here in Silicon Valley is that every 30 years, there's like a huge new wave of innovation. Some people say we're in the 4th industrial revolution, and that's kind of like a bigger time frame. But we just look at the Silicon Valley. What I like to think about is in the 1960s, the microchip was invented, and that took the marginal cost of computing to $0. And that was thanks to Moore's law. And that was important because nowadays, all of us, we do PPC, we do SEO. But when we go to our computer and we think about opening a spreadsheet, nobody thinks about the cost of using a spreadsheet because thanks to microchips, there's effectively no additional cost to do these things using the computers and the hardware that we already have. Now, 30 years later, the internet gets invented, and what that changes, it takes the marginal cost of distribution approach $0. And thanks to that innovation, that's why we all have jobs. That's why we're all at this conference, because this is the industry that we work in, because we have the internet to distribute the content, to sell things and get leads and do our businesses. Now, give it another, give it 20 years and Bitcoin gets invented. I still don't really understand the value of Bitcoin. I know people have made a lot of money with it, but like as far as like how is it fundamentally changing the world in good ways, I'm still kind of not sure about that. But then another 10 years later, the 2020s, generative AI comes along. And this is what we're talking about today. So this is making the marginal cost of creation approach $0. So now we have the microchip, we have the internet for distribution, but what do we distribute? Well, the stuff that we're creating, that is also becoming really cheap to make, thanks to GPT, Gemini, and Claude. And so let me paint you a picture of what the venture capitalists here in the Silicon Valley are saying. Right, nowadays, we might use GPT to generate keywords, to write some blog posts, but imagine 5-10 years down the road that you can go to a product like Netflix, but it actually generates movies customized to you on the fly because it knows what kind of stories you like, it knows what kind of characters you like, and it's able to generate not just the story, but also the full video to support like a full-length movie. And that's sort of that vision of the future. that may seem a bit far-fetched now, but we're going to get there. And that's thanks to all of the generative AI. Now, I also hang out with a lot of local people here from Google. Google is just down the road, and I was at a party, and one of the Google search people was basically saying, listen, AI is becoming your memory. So when you think about generative AI, you have these glasses. You see me wearing these glasses on the left side. Those are the Ray-Ban Metas. And they can look at something and you can ask questions about the thing. Or you have these buttons and pins, and they can constantly listen to conversations that you have. So now you have a button that's constantly listening. At the end of the day, it can give you a thing that says, hey, Fred, here are the 10 most interesting people you talk to, and here's the 20 action items that you had in conversations throughout the day. And that's kind of cool, because as these AI assistants are with you throughout the day, whether they sit on your face as glasses, or a pin that records audio, or it's the phone and desktop app from GPT, they build up your memory. And so one future prediction that I have is that the keyword is in fact finally dying, right? When your AI is constantly with you and it serves as your memory, it becomes much less important to know exactly what keywords to put into the search engine, because you don't have to fully qualify what it is you're looking for when the AI knows what it is you probably meant. So a very simple example, if I go to New York and I'm wearing my AI glasses and I go shopping for couches, or I'm not even shopping for couches, but I see a couch that I really like in a store that I just walked past. Now, a couple of weeks later, I can be like, hey, Meta, or hey, GPT, like, can we buy that couch I saw in New York? Right? That's a very different type of keyword or experience than we're used to. Like, we don't have to say who made the sofa. We don't have to say what brand it's from, what color it is. It's just basically digging back in your memory from AI to get that thing. So the notion of the keyword as we know it today is really kind of, I think, on the way out. Now, the other thing that I'm going to predict here is that the landing page is dead. The point here is that chat is really good at answering questions. And we've seen this in data and analysis from Microsoft. So they say that people who do searches in the generative experience on Microsoft, they tend to have higher click-through rates on ads. So they find what they're looking for much more quickly. And I think this speaks to the memory element, because the memory knows what it is you're likely interested in. It's able to show you better ads that are more relevant to you. But the surprising thing is that people actually don't leave the search experience and the chat experience quite as quickly. They actually start going deeper and having a conversation with the chatbot. And so what's shifting here is that instead of the consumer finding what they need on the search engine, they stay on the search engine, they have the chat experience, and all the things they would have done on the landing page, they now start doing with the chatbot. And so by the time the consumer goes to your landing page, really the only thing they still want is to be able to purchase the thing they already know they want. They don't need to be sold anymore. They've already asked all the questions. They already have all the information from the chatbot. And so my prediction here is that the landing page as a website will become much less important over time, because all of that is being handled in a much better user experience by the chatbots. And so then the third prediction that I have is that SEO is actually not dead because of ChatGPT, but it's more alive than ever. And so I'm an author of a couple of books, and what's always frustrated me about writing books is that you basically have to produce 250 pages of content to be able to sell a book, right? Otherwise, the book is too thin, and then it looks like a pamphlet, and nobody's going to pay for it, and it's not quite as impressive. So how do authors do this? Well, they say, okay, this is what I want people to take away from my book, but I have to assume that maybe they don't understand everything that leads up to that argument. So I need to write a 250-page journey to get someone from point A to point B. And I'm going to have a linear experience of how I'm going to teach them all the things they need to know to finally arrive at the final conclusion that I have. Now, what's kind of cool is that ChatGPT makes it really easy and possible to have non-linear experiences on the internet. And if you think about writing a book, it's kind of the same as writing a blog post in a way, right? You have a structure in a blog post where you build up to your final point and you give examples about your point. The thing that's frustrating is, like, how do you know what examples you should include? Like, should you do lead gen examples, or should it be e-commerce? And if it's lead gen, should you do a painter or a plumber or someone who sells mortgages? Like, what's the best example? Because everyone who's reading it has sort of a different background. Well, the nice thing about ChatGPT is it can enable those nonlinear experiences where you have a conversation and you say, oh, okay, that's an interesting point you made in the blog post, but how would that apply to me if I'm a painter? How would I apply that to my business? And so what I'm arguing is that these LLMs, the more content you feed them, the better they'll be able to do a job at having a non-linear experience in terms of guiding the user, the reader, to understanding your point. And so there's actually the other point is that when you write a book, like, you don't write just 250 pages, you probably write 350, 400 pages, and then you cut out stuff because you're like, I don't need more examples about that same thing. But now I could actually give those examples to LLM. I could have them published somewhere, and the LLM is actually going to feed on that, and it's going to pull those examples in at the right time to craft that ultimate experience for the audience. So actually, there's more need, I would argue, for content than there was ever before. Now, in terms of how people use AI, I see it in three ways, right? So if you think of yourself as a mountaineer and you want to explore new heights, new peaks, you want to climb the highest mountain, be the best in your game, you want to go into that growth zone, you want to reach that new peak. And so AI can be used effectively to accelerate the learning of new skills that you're genuinely interested in. And so it's an effective for skill development with real interest. But the point here is you can't just say, hey, I've got no interest in climbing. I've got no interest. I hate snow, but I want to be on the top of Mount Everest, right? That puts you in the danger zone, right? If you try to use AI to do new things without understanding fully what it is or without taking a real interest, it's going to make mistakes. It's going to tell you things that are hallucinations. And if you can't pick out those hallucinations because you don't want to take the time to really understand it, you're going to fall off the cliff. That's the danger zone. And then I think where a lot of us operate today is in the efficiency zone. So we think about what is it that we do today as digital marketers. So we do keyword research, we do blog development, we do ad text writing and ad text optimization. And so we really understand how these tasks work. So it's very easy for us to give these to generative AI. And because we understand like what would be a good result that came out if we're doing keyword research, we can quickly spot if the AI is not doing a good job. And we also know how to fix it ourselves, right? So it can help us maybe get 80% of the way to where we need it to be. And then the last 20%, if we need to, we can do it ourselves because that's already the skill set that we have. So that makes us more efficient. And I think that's also what enables us to think about going into a new growth zone. So if you want to learn how to write scripts to be a better PPC marketer, and you've always kind of had an interest but never had the time, well, this is great because now you can use AI. And again, think about the last slide where I was talking about the nonlinear experience. You don't need to take a course from someone who's told you exactly how to learn this thing. You can come in and you can say, I already understand how JavaScript works, but I've never really looked at Google Ad scripts. So take me to that next level. And it just rebuilds that story, it rebuilds the narrative and the education on the fly for what your scenario is. So at the end of the day, think about you're not competing against AI. It's not you against a machine, but it's you against other people who know how to use these machines better. If you are not using these tools effectively, then you're going to lose out because other people will have figured it out. So that's why I'm happy that all of you are here, because I'm going to show you some tools that are going to make you stand out against your competition. So let me take you into one of them. So improving content and ideation. So one tool I really like is called Talk Notes. There's a number of tools out there, but basically what Talk Notes allows me to do is I can just ramble. I don't have to dictate. I can just go for a walk and I can be like, hey, I wanted to write something about a new topic I've just thought about. And I ramble and I don't necessarily have structured thought. It just records everything. And then it takes the transcript and it turns it into a nice blog post suggestion. And what's kind of cool is it can take that same transcript and you can say, I want to turn this into a list or an email or a blog post. Or you can also make custom ones and I can say, okay, here's a list. So what, based on my ramblings, turn it into a list, and it structures it. If during your rambling and recording, you actually change your mind, you can just say, oh, by the way, I changed my mind on this, like scratch that last thought, like this is what I think now. The AI is really good at picking up on that. It can clean it up for you. And then just like I made a list, I can say, now turn this list into maybe a podcast plan. Like, well, what topic should I talk about when it comes to maybe the Department of Justice lawsuit against Google and their findings on ads auctions. And so it puts that nice structured list together. But the key thing here too is that so often when we think about dictation, we think about having to have structured thoughts and dictating those and having like perfect thoughts that turn into a blog post. But the nice thing about AI is that you can just ramble and it'll find that structure and it'll put it in place for you. Now, here's another example that I really like. This was something that was put on LinkedIn by Caterina Mariani. And she said she was using a script from Nils Roymans that picks up on trending search terms. And so a trending search term is a search term that has a high increase in impressions from 1 week to the next week. And she said, I'm taking these from the script and then I'm manually copying and pasting them into GPT. And I'm saying, GPT, can you suggest some newsletter topics based on these trending search terms? And I think this is a fantastic example of recombinant innovation. It's taking existing tools and putting them together in a new creative way. But what I didn't like was that it's a very manual process. So the script in the beginning is automated, but then giving it to GPT is not automated. So I said, why don't I use GPT to actually help me build a full automation end to end and turn this into a script? And so I asked GPT, can you generate this for me so I can see the logs that came out? This is the code at the bottom that you see that GPT generated. And it created a good script. And so now it literally, I run this script and it sends me an email that's like, hey, there's a search term, Google Merchant Center. That was a trending search term in your account. And here's a related blog post idea that you could put on your blog based on that. Now, within the script, of course, I fully control the prompt, so I can give it as much detail as I want about the type of output that I want to get from it. But the point is, this is recombinant innovation. We've given it to GPT to take it to a full automation where this literally runs by itself on a weekly basis, and it sends me an email about stuff that I should be talking about more because more people have been searching for it. It's also combining SEO and PPC, which I really like. Now, the next one here is once you have content, how do you edit it better? And what are some of the tools that I use? So hopefully you've all used this by now. It's been out for a few weeks, but it's called GPT-4o with Canvas. And so the Canvas component of GPT basically puts things into a collaborative document. So one frustration that I have with GPT is when I ask it to write a piece of code, like you see here, or a blog post, I will look at that and I will say, okay, there's something I need to change. So if you look at line number 3 on that slide where it says spreadsheet URL, that I have to fill in with my own spreadsheet. So I copy and paste the code, I put it in Google Ads, I put in the URL of that spreadsheet, and then I run the script and the script comes back with an error. And so I give the script back to GPT and I say, can you fix this error? And it says, sure, I'll fix it. But it comes back with the spreadsheet URL is gone. And that's frustrating. What Canvas does is once you make a change and you put in your spreadsheet URL, the next time it regenerates and it fixes the mistakes it had made, it's going to leave the stuff that you already tweaked alone. The same thing with a blog post. So if you're editing within there, it's kind of like a Google Doc where your collaborator is the generative AI, but the things that you've already made better or changed, it's generally going to leave those alone because it knows that that's already fixed. That's already how you want it to be done. So GPT-4o with Canvas, it just, you pick it from the dropdown when you're using GPT. It's a really cool new capability. All right. So the other thing I do as far as content editing is I have a team of GPTs that help me produce my content or my ads or anything that I want. So you see these pictures here. I've got Benedict Pierce, and he's the persona of a skeptical reader. Now, just to be clear, these GPTs, these are custom versions of GPT that are super easy to build. Anyone can build these if you have a paid subscription to GPT. And so what I've done is I've said, when I'm writing a blog, these are the 5 characters who can help me write better blogs. So I have a fact checker. I have Mark, who's a CMO. So he's a reader who's going to take the perspective from a CMO level. And I also have Kai, who's more of a junior PPC manager. So I want to, sometimes make sure that both the PPC manager as well as the CMO get value from the content that I write. And then I have Sophie, who's my copy editor. And so let's take a closer look here at Pierce. So here's how I built Pierce. So he's a GPT, given him a name, and I've given him specific instructions. So I asked him to act as a skeptical person who likes to poke holes in articles. So tell me the things you don't believe or that don't seem correct. You don't necessarily have to be fact-based, but just like you have preconceived notions, and then you can explain to us why you think certain things just don't make sense to you. So really be skeptical. So if I give Pierce an article that I've written, he comes back and he's like, oh, dude, this article, you have an over-reliance on MMM, media mix models as a solution. You're simplifying how regression analysis works. So he's like poking all of these holes in my articles. And then I have Sophie, and what I do is rather than just having a conversation with Pierce, I have a conversation with all 4 of my custom GPTs, but I do it in the same thread. So I start a new GPT chat and I do the @ symbol to call in Pierce and I say, hey, Pierce, you look at this article. And then I say, hey, Clara, can you go and do the fact checking? And then I say, hey, Mark, can you go and read this as a CMO? And then at the end, I say, Sophie, your job now is to look at what all of these other GPTs have said and consolidate it back into the things that I should fix in this article. So the GPTs are actually talking to each other and building off of each other to give me a final output at the end that's taking the perspective of all of these things that I've built. So it enables you to be a better writer without having to talk to actual people to give that feedback, right? Because you can get GPT to act as different personas. So that's been proving really useful to me. Now, content also needs visuals. So one tool that I've liked here is Napkin AI. So if after we've written something, it just comes back with suggested visualizations for whatever you've written in a blog post. So here's one example where we were looking at how things work before generative and after generative, puts in the text from the article, but it also gives a couple of other variations of what those images might look like. So that's a useful tool that we've used. The other one that I've used is called Alpaca ML. And a particularly neat capability of this one is that you can do a doodle. So literally on a piece of paper, you sketch out what it is you want to visualize. So here I was at a conference and the organizer said, hey, let's all meet at 5 a.m. We'll go for a walk on the beach and look at the sunrise. So like, oh, that's cool. Let me put a visual in the deck the next day to represent that. And so I sketched it out with a doodle. Within 30 seconds, I got this image in Photoshop, which was generated by Gen AI. And it has the sunrise, it has the sailboat, and it has the people on the beach. So it did a pretty good job. And I have no visual skills other than doodling like you see on the left, but it was able to create a pretty beautiful image right there on the right. Now, let's do the next thing, which is improving content through videos. My favorite tool there is editing podcasts like they're in a doc. And the tool I use for that is called Descript. So when we produce podcasts, rather than having to look at an hour of content and do complicated video editing, it turns the whole video into a transcript that you see on the left. And then you can start editing that like a doc. So if people say or ah, or they repeat themselves, or they stumble, it's very easy. You see it's all underlined. And so they have the system called Underlord that automatically can cut out those pauses and make the podcast much more dynamic. The other thing that this tool allows you to do is get the speaker to look back at the camera. So if the speaker was not looking at the camera, the eye contact is off. There's a little feature that you can toggle on, and then the person starts looking at the camera again. So if you wanted to record a video of yourself, but you're reading a script off of maybe the whiteboard that's sitting behind the camera or off on the side, you can record that, and then this AI will make it look like you're actually looking at the camera and delivering this speech perfectly from memory. So a really cool capability. This is also available in Descript, which is about a $30 piece of software. Now, the next thing is publishing content at scale. So one thing here is that you have to remember that GPT and generative AI can do more than just generate text. It can actually generate code, and it can generate things like JSON files or Markdown. So in our case, in the case of Optmyzr, we have a content management system, and the content itself is in a Markdown format that gets put into certain templates. So that when you see the page on the right-hand side, that is a combination of Markdown content with a template. So if you split it up on the left, you see there's a schema. The schema is basically the Markdown. And then the bottom thing is the product description. So I can say, hey, GPT, here's the schema that I need to fill out this page of content, but I would like you to write the content to describe a new product. So this new product, it's called Sidekick. It's a Gen AI assistant for PPC advertisers. I give it a little bit of text, and then what comes back is from the query on the left that I put in the prompt that I put into GPT, it gives you back this sort of a structured data. And then that structured data you can feed back into your content management system. And so now you can start scaling content really at infinity, because it's giving you exactly the markdown or exactly the JSON that you can just upload to your database, and it's automatically populating all of these pages. So again, just a reminder, GPT, Claude, they can write code, they can write JSON, and they can be really, really helpful. Now, one of the coolest tools that most of you have probably seen lately is called Notebook LM. This is a Google tool, and it's been particularly useful at automating podcasts. And when I asked on LinkedIn, like, what's a cool tool that I should talk about, these were some of the people who all pointed out that this was something I needed to look at. So I generated a podcast through this, but one of the frustrations was that if you ask it to make a podcast about a blog that you've written, it kind of takes its own angle, and so there's very little editing that you can do. So I said, what if I could build my own sort of Notebook LM using off-the-shelf components like what you get in GPT? So what I took was a platform announcement, so a Google announcement from their blog, and I took a few of these inputs, and then I give them to GPT, and then the prompt is something as simple as write me a script for a podcast segment about these 3 PDF documents about some piece of news. It gives me the output, and then I can tweak it in GPT 4.0 with Canvas. I can go and tweak the script, and I can work with GPT to make it better. And then OpenAI has a TTS, or a text-to-speech generator. So I feed the transcript into the TTS generator, and then I feed it into a podcast platform. So I just give it the audio file that was generated by OpenAI. And now I have a podcast, a virtually generated podcast that's basically just come from me giving GPT a bunch of articles and the prompt, make me a podcast about this. And so this is really a way to scale up your content, your podcasts. Currently, we're still playing with making this, the narrators or the hosts sound a little bit more lively, but this is already very promising. And I just wanted to illustrate this because, when you see something like Notebook LM, and maybe it's not doing exactly what you want it to do, there's a lot of capabilities out there using APIs to put it together in your own way and fix some of the things that may have been frustrating, like maybe what is the content that comes out. But now for myself, like here I'm sitting in my car, and the podcast that I'm listening to in my car is literally the podcast that I've generated automatically using GPT. So instead of me having to go on search engine land and read the news about PPC, I have an automatic podcast that just pops up whenever I get into my car that basically narrates the summarization of those things. I also do this for my emails. So my most important emails get fed into a personal podcast using this flow right here that I just explained. So that's a kind of a life hack to make myself more efficient. Now let's talk about improving ads and PPC for a minute. So there's many things like keyword generation, ad text generation. That's covered quite extensively by a lot of people. So let's do something a bit more unique, like building a custom audience segment. And one thing that GPT is really good at is assuming the persona of something else. So here what I said in the prompt was, what characteristics or attributes of a hotel would a budget-conscious traveler care about? So I'm not a budget-conscious traveler myself. I prefer luxury hotels. So sometimes it's a bit harder for me to think, like, what would a budget-conscious traveler actually go and search for? So GPT assumes that persona and says, these are the things they would look for. So then what I said is, okay, great. Can you put that in the table along with some of the keywords they might use to search for those types of things? So now I get that table back. And the last thing I do is I take these keyword lists and I put them in custom segments on Google. And so this is actually building me audience segments based on different personas of people who might want to buy the type of stuff that we're selling. So this is a really useful way to build audiences using GPT. Now, if you think about GPT assuming the persona of someone else, you can also think about AI-powered localization. And I'm not saying translation, I'm saying localization. So how do you tailor your ads to cultural preferences? And this is an idea that I got from PCase, which is an agency out of France and Germany. But so as you see on the right side, I said, write a short and compelling text ad for a fast flower delivery service. So great. So it gives me an English text ad. And then I said in the next prompt, can you localize this for a Parisian audience and consider the cultural preferences that would appeal to someone in Paris? And it comes back and it says, let's use the words élégance and raffiné. So elegance is something that GPT seems to think would make sense to a Parisian audience. I'm like, okay, fine. I kind of trust you on that. I don't really know. But then, funnily enough, the next day I'm watching TV and I see an ad up here for Air France, which is the French airline. And look, the first word in their slogan is elegance is a journey. And I'm like, oh my God, GPT was like so spot on to know that elegance is a word that seems to be associated with French culture and French preferences. So that makes total sense. And this was cool because I would have never thought of using the word elegance in those ads. So that's how GPT can help you with localization. Now, the thing sometimes when we look at search GPT or doing searches or just like using GPT to find stuff, there's a limiting factor, right? Like we find out what we need, but then we still usually have to go to Google or a search engine to go and buy that thing. So here I'm using, again, my Meta glasses and I'm looking with the cameras at this box and I'm like, what is this snack? And it says it's Japanese. And I'm like, where can I buy it? What if it could say, oh, you can find this at my store for $10. Would you like to order it? And I could actually say, yes, I would like to order it. Well, how will that be possible? And so this, I think, will happen through a framework that in GPT is called actions. So actions are a way that you give your API, your company's API, to GPT. And so instead of it speaking English or your language, it starts to speak code, the code that works with your website. It knows how to use your API. And so now if that API feeds directly into your inventory, it can actually say, yes, we have this thing in stock and this is the price that we would currently charge. And if it has access to the API to place the order and collect your credit card information, then it's not too far-fetched to think you could actually, through GPT, place the order. And so I think actions are going to be fundamental in enabling some of these things. So even before the transactions become possible, I think every company should look at how to enhance GPT by providing it actions for your systems, right? So if you run a restaurant reservation site, connected to the availability data. If you have e-commerce, connected to your feeds data, your pricing data, because that is what makes GPT grounded in reality. That's what makes it able to pull real-time information and in the future also start doing transactions. And so how we use this in Optmyzr is we have what we call a sidekick. And in sidekick, you can ask a number of questions about your account. You can also ask a custom question, but you could say, how did my account performance change in the last 30 days compared to the previous period? Or what are some top optimizations I could do? Well, we don't want GPT to hallucinate, so we have to give it the ads data. But rather than us figuring out what is the data we needed to give it, we've just taught GPT through actions how to use our API so it can pull whatever data it needs to answer whatever question you have in real time, grounded in real data from your Google Ads accounts. Right. So, and this is through action. So that's how we build much more useful tools that are much more grounded in reality. Now, if you wanted to start building some automations for your own ads, you can definitely write scripts. One thing to remember is GPT is multimodal. So you don't have to write a whole long prompt. You can literally give it a photo of something you whiteboarded. So here, my target ROAS is 500%. There's an email, and then there's a decision tree we go through. You can say, turn this into a script. GPT will actually do that. Now, there's a new GPT model. It's called GPT-01. It's very good at reasoning. It's really good at coding as well because it doesn't need step-by-step guidance. And so what's cool about GPT-10 is that if you ask it to do a task, it'll actually identify all the steps that it thinks it needs to go through. And you can look at those steps and then make sure that those steps kind of match what you would have done manually. But in the older models of GPT-4o, for example, you would have had to basically write out, these are the steps you should follow. And then it would have done a good job in turning this into a script. The O1 model actually does the reasoning on your behalf. Now, this is a little QR code, grab this, but if you're going to copy and paste a script from someone else, I think you have to be careful about what is that script doing, because the script could very easily steal your Google Ads data. So grab that code. This, you can give it a script, and then it'll say, okay, these are the security risks associated with using that script in your account. Okay, and then finally, improving team performance. I've used GPT for sales calls. So I basically feed it Zoom recordings from my sales team, and I say, give me the mismatch between what my salesperson talked about and what my customer was asking about. And so then it says, here's the mismatches. I give this to the sales team, to each individual. And so it keeps reminding them that they tend to have a narrative that they like to follow, which may be missing some of the questions that the customer is asking. So this refocuses my sales team to make sure they're actually talking about what the prospect wants to hear about. Again, it's very automated. You just feed in the Zoom recording from the call. It automatically transcribes it. It understands who the salesperson and the customer is, and it can do things like spit out these mismatches. Now, as far as improving personal life, Gemini is really cool because Gemini can summarize the emails in your Google Workspace, right? So this is cool. I bought some stuff at Target, apparently. There's some promotions going on. But what if I could make this better? What if I could say, hey, can you just summarize the emails related to the school? I have 3 kids. I get way too many emails from all the teachers about stuff, and it's super hard to keep up, right? So what if I could just get an email or a summarization of all the school-related emails? So this goes into retrieval augmented generation, where you basically say to the generative assistant, go and fetch the data that's relevant, and then do the summarization on top of that. But that's still pretty manual because I have to go to Gemini and I have to ask it to do this. So what if I could actually generate an email like this automatically twice a day, which is an email digest with summarizations? So the way that I built this, that any of you can build this, is you use Zapier. Whenever a new email with a certain label comes into your inbox, you connect that through the text formatter in Zapier to just cut out the text. Then you give that to OpenAI, where you can choose the model and you can give it a prompt like, go ahead and summarize this. And then you append it to a digest, and then that digest gets emailed to you. So now, instead of me having to read my email constantly, twice a day, I get a summary that says, here's what's in your inbox, here's the things you might want to care about. And then more recently, I've added a 5th step to this process, which is turn this into a text-to-speech through OpenAI, and then give that text-to-speech to my personal podcast channel, which I've subscribed to in RSS. And so now, again, when I get into my car, I have a podcast channel just for my personal email, and I can listen to my email, and not just actually listen to my email. I listen to the summarization of what was most important. So that's another life hack that made me more efficient. So with that, we have a few minutes for questions. I hope you found some of these tools interesting and what I do interesting. So thanks for listening.
Fred, actually, it was perfect. There are too much life hacks that we can use in daily lives and also our professional life. Thank you so much. I hope you are going to share the deck, right?
Yes, I will.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Because I just want to read it again. And personally, I would love to thank you. And we have a couple of questions. Actually, I don't want to tire you out a lot, but if you want, we can choose some questions, maybe two of them. So here is the first one. What frameworks or models do you use to evaluate the effectiveness of generative AI outputs?
So I don't really use frameworks too much, to be honest. But again, I sort of, you pit the AIs against each other. So you can take an output from GPT and give it to Claude and ask Claude to critique what GPT generated, and then give that critique back to each other and sort of go through stages like that. When it comes to like evaluating the actual effectiveness, I think there's like Hugging Face and there's other systems that kind of do these measurements. I don't feel that the strong need to do it myself. It's really experimentation, right? Because the other thing is, even within GPT, you can choose between the different models. And one thing that I do have to decide about is, if I'm going to summarize an email, will I spend money on the model that costs $60 per million tokens, or the one that costs 60 cents per million tokens? And so figuring out, like, is that cheaper one still good enough to do the task and save me 100x on the cost? Like, that's a pretty big deal, right? But that usually comes out of me going into the OpenAI playground. So I highly recommend go in the OpenAI playground. You can use different models. You can have settings like temperature. You can dial all of these things in to really try to tweak the models. And then once I find a model that I think does a good enough job for the task at hand, and there's different models for different things, right? So O1, really good for writing scripts, but even 3.5, a super old model, it's really, really cheap now. And it's good enough for keyword generation. So why would I spend, 100 times as much money on a newer model?
Yeah, you're right. Thank you so much. And let me get the next question. Can you discuss any technical safeguard you implement to mitigate risks associated with Gen
AI? Again, I think it sort of depends on the scenario that you have. The biggest safeguard is almost always being transparent about what is generated by AI and getting the user to understand that it could make mistakes. So that's one. And then it's understanding, like, how critical is this thing. So we have a tool. It's an online quiz. It's hatquest.com. And we've used structured outputs from generative to generate quizzes on the fly. So in the past, we had a person who was generating quizzes manually, but then we said generative AI can actually come up with a question with 4 potential answers, and it can tell us which one is the right one. And it gives us that back in a JSON. So now anyone can come into this tool and ask to generate a quiz about any topic with any number of questions. It's all just generated on the fly by GPT. But this is a game. It's for fun, right? So is it exactly correct? So no, we don't know. Most of the time it is, but it's not a high enough, it's not important enough for us to put a lot of technical safeguards in place. Whereas when it comes to Optmyzr data, and when are we going to suggest that you like make a big budget change to something, that's where we would actually run it through more sophisticated models. We'll compare it to what our own, maybe more old school methodology is, then compare that to what generative might have said. And those would be the safeguards. The other thing I'll say is, if you start using the code interpreter or the advanced data analysis from GPT, which writes Python code, and Claude has models as well that write code for you. One mistake is that you come back and do the same prompt and regenerate the code every time you need that same analysis done. So for example, you can do a seasonality analysis and it'll write Python code to do this. I recommend people save the code once you validated that it actually works and does it correctly, because every time you regenerate it, it opens you up to potential errors. And this is a thing in generative AI, they call it drift, where even if the answer is correct today, it could actually become wrong tomorrow. And quite surprisingly, there were some studies where the latest models from GPT over a span of 3 months got significantly worse, whereas the older models got significantly better in that same time span. And this was like done on a basic mathematical question. So you can't assume that it being correct today also means it's going to be correct tomorrow. So that's another safeguard you should build in.
Yeah, you're totally right. And thank you so much, Fred. I mean, for your time. And again, you're here with us. It's really important to us. So thank you so much. And for the great presentation, for your time, for everything.
Thank you, everyone. It's great being here.
Thank you. Hope to see you next time. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.